I've figured out the perfect trade target for the Maple Leafs at the upcoming NHL trade deadline. I'll talk about who I'm targeting and why after some emerging trends are coming to light. We'll get into that and preview tonight's Leafs and Bruins. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's going on, pal? How we feeling on a Tuesday?
Feeling pretty good. Got some warm weather, so it's the big melt.
Big melt. Yep. It's funny because there was a lot. So I don't know. My family wasn't great at shoveling. Last time we had our first big snow dump, and then the melt came, and then it was cold the next day, which meant icy driveway, and then it snowed again. So we had pretty bad driveway for a couple of weeks here. And it's melting away, and I am very happy for it because I think I almost slipped like 6 times, in the last week or so, trying to walk up and down the driveway at my parents' place. It's absolutely insane, but it's going away. It's the big melt. Hopefully, that means that we can get a little bit of warmer weather coming up pretty soon, but we shall see. We shall see. All right. Quickly before we get into tonight's matchup, Dave, and preview Leafs and Bruins, Toronto back in action, looking to make it 3 in a row post Four Nations face-off. Did you happen to hear Ray Ferraro on Overdrive today?
I did not. Today was a busy day. I didn't get a chance to listen to a lot of radio hits.
So Ray Ferraro is an absolute beauty, former NHLer. He used to be a regular on Overdrive. Now he's with ESPN, and he's doing some stuff with Sportsnet for the Canucks broadcast as well. But if there's a guy who's in the mix talking to people left, right, and center, it's Ray Ferraro. And he was around down on location during the Four Nations face-off, and he had a chance to speak with Mike Sullivan, the head coach of Team USA. And apparently Ray asked him, who surprised him most coming out of the tournament? What name do you think he brought up unprompted, Dave?
Well, if you're talking about this on a Leafs podcast, I'm going to assume he talked about Auston Matthews.
That is exactly who he was talking about. He also threw in Jack Eichel's name in there, to be fair, but he said that this is, from Ray Ferraro, who said that Mike Sullivan told him that Jack Eichel and Auston Matthews, he said they were, quote, winners who play the right way on both sides of the puck. And it's interesting. I think everyone in Leafland kind of looks at a guy like Matthews, and it's like, well, he hasn't won anything for Toronto, so I don't know if you can quite call him a winner. And then if you look, he captained a team to another loss, a disappointing loss in Team USA. It's funny because everyone is always focusing on the one play, right? The game-winning goal, Matthews leaving McDavid in front of the net. Especially Kevin McGran. I don't know if you saw that sound bite.
Oh, I saw it.
Sure, Kevin was quite humorous, but he was pretty solid throughout the game, right? With that one play aside, I thought that he did play very well. He was back checking well. He was in on the forecheck. He had 2 assists. He set up a couple of goals for USA, and nearly he had the game on a stick. Almost ended it in overtime twice. But Binnington came up big. So, it doesn't surprise me, I guess, is what I'm saying, that, he stood out to Mike Sullivan because, coaches, they look at the whole package. They look at the full 60 minutes plus. And, if you just focus on the one play, the misplay in overtime, and, obviously a lot of Leaf fans are focusing on that mistake, that mental mistake. Yeah, you could have a sour taste in your mouth about Auston Matthews, but Mike Sullivan really liked his tournament overall. And, he said that this guy, he can be a winner. So let's hope that's the case, Dave. Let's hope that Auston Matthews can be a winner. We found out that Mitch Marner came up big in a big moment. Hopefully Auston Matthews a couple months down the road can do the same.
It's something that we have. I know a lot of these fans, when they were looking at this tournament, it's like we haven't seen Marner Matthews really come up in the big games, right? It's been kind of follow them really throughout their Leafs career, right? So I think a coach saying that, Leslie tweet like that, that's been the whole plan with bringing Craig Berube into the fold with this team and with this group, is they believe that with the right coach and with the right, you know, I guess motivation, that this team can get the most out of a guy like Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner in those big moments, right? Sometimes, yes, I get it. Players of that caliber should be built for it, but sometimes they kind of need to be put in that situation as well and guided in that situation. I think that's why, you hear it from Mike Sullivan, a guy who has won multiple Stanley Cups, right? For him to say that has a bit of cachet behind it. John Cooper has always been a big supporter of Mitch Marner.
Yeah.
That carries weight, right? That's a guy who, he wouldn't say that, especially when he's the guy's coach at Canada for Team Canada. He's not going to say it just for the sake of saying it. He's going to say it because he believes it, right?
Yeah.
I don't ever see those coaches ever say something that they don't actually think is true. So I think for them to say it, I think people should take notice of when coaches like that they'll say those things about those players.
Yeah, and it's one thing when they talk about them when they're being directly asked, and especially if they're rolling through Toronto, like when Tampa comes to play the Leafs, or when Pittsburgh comes to play Toronto. Like, yeah, okay, at that point, they're point blank being asked about these players, and maybe they just want to speak nicely, so there's no bulletin board material. But in situations like that, where it was John Cooper, talking about his own player, Mitch Marner, for that tournament, spoke very glowingly about him. And same thing with Sullivan when it came to Auston Matthews. So as a Leaf fan, you got to be happy, but you also want to see that translate for your team, for the squad. And that being said, you look at Auston Matthews, he's in quite the scoring slump. Like, yeah, he had the empty netter against Carolina the other night, but if you exclude that goal, he has gone 10 games, including the Four Nations faceoff. He's now gone 10 games without scoring a goal on a goaltender. Actually 11. I think it's 11 games now, I believe, without scoring a goal, because it was 6 plus 6, 9. Yeah, and then 2 coming out of Four Nations. So, yeah, it's now been 11 games in a row, including Four Nations, that he has not scored on a goaltender. That's got to change, and hopefully it changes tonight against the Big Bad Bruins with a valuable 2 points on the board.
It does. And again, this is why it was so important to have that depth scoring come through the last couple of days, because remember the issues this Leafs team had offensively, right? Leading up to that, I think we're talking about a month ago, they could not score more than 2 goals in a game.
Oh,
right?
Before they went on the West Coast road trip, they couldn't score more than 2 goals.
Right.
And I don't think you can rely on what we saw this weekend happening every game. Like, that was nice, and it helped the team get 4 points, as the big guns weren't quite rolling the way that they typically are. And it was nice, and they were able to get through it, and it, a lot of big confidence boost, I'm sure, for a lot of the players. But that guy in particular, Auston Matthews, he's got to start putting the puck in the back of the net for this team to have some serious success.
Well, they do. It's we've always said that this team goes as far as the Stars will take them, and this is a critical point in the year, right? You've got next on the schedule, you've got 3 games against 3 teams that are technically still fighting for a playoff spot, but they're not in the playoffs right now, with the Bruins, the Rangers, and the Penguins. And then you've got, a team like San Jose coming to town. You got 4 games right there where you can get a good lead ahead in the standings before the tougher schedule then eventually comes. Golden Knights, Avalanche, you got the Panthers in there, the Senators who are fighting for a spot. So, like, the tough games are coming, but they also have some. We talked about it yesterday, a pretty reasonable schedule when it comes to strength of schedule, a favorable one.
In in the final 25 games in terms of teams who are who have I think it was a 530 was their winning percentage. 530 was the win percentage, which was the easiest schedule in the NHL, easiest strength of schedule in terms of opponents' records. That's the phrase I was looking for there, buddy. But yeah, like Boston, got to get through Boston. Then you mentioned it, San Jose, and then I think the Rangers are coming up, and then Vegas, and then you got a couple of games, and then it'll eventually soften up again for the Leafs. But it doesn't matter who they're playing. They got to get the big boys scoring, because I don't think you can rely on, David Camp for Chris Tanev or Jake McCabe to score each and every night, right? Nick Robertson's not going to pop in 2 goals each and every night. So you got to start getting goals from these players. And Matthews, you got the stat here. This year, he has a career low 1 goal, 1.00 goal per 60 minutes of 5-on-5 play this year. It's a career low, down from his career best at 1.8 per 60 minutes of play last year at 5-on-5. So, a guy who's been nothing but a 5-on-5 goal demon. He's been the best 5-on-5 goal scorer since he's came into the league. Hasn't quite been able to get that production this year, and hopefully that can change. There's also been I want to acknowledge this, and we'll talk about this in a moment too, a little bit more in depth. Maybe this is a tease. There's another player that's, the underlying numbers aren't looking so great, and our pal Jonas Siegel of The Athletic kind of did a deep dive into it, which kind of leads me to a new number 1 trade target for what the Leafs truly need come trade deadline. So we'll get into that. I'll detail the numbers and who the player that I'm referring to is. So we'll do that, and we'll preview tonight's Leafs and Boston game coming up later on the Locked On Leafs podcast.
Today's show is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on all their sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your posts at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's why Indeed sponsored job comes in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidate right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need.
The Locked On Leafs podcast continues. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you on a game day. Maple Leafs taking on the Boston Bruins in Beantown. And the last time that Mitch Marner was there, he was victorious with Team Canada. Got the assist on the game-winning goal to Connor McDavid. But who did he pass the puck through to make it happen? Well, it's his teammate, Auston Matthews, who's looking to get going offensively. Why don't we break down the matchup here, and then I'll get to my Leafs trade target a little bit later on in the show. Let's take a look at what we're dealing with here when it comes to Leafs versus Bruins. So they've played 3 times so far this year. The Bruins won the first meeting 4-3 in overtime, and then the Leafs have won the last 2. They won 4-0, and then they won 6-4 the last time that these 2 teams played one another. So the Leafs are up 2-1 in this series on the season. And you know what? This is a team that Toronto has really, really played well against this year, but prior to this season had struggled. So it's nice to see that the shoe's on the other foot and the Bruins are struggling. And you can really kind of see why. Things are not going well for the Bees this year. They're out of a playoff spot with a 27-24-7 record. And look how porous those special teams numbers are, Dave. I had to triple check 3 different sources to make sure that I had this correct, that the Bruins had a 14.8% power play and a 75.6% penalty kill. That is atrocious, Dave, and a big reason for why this team find themselves on the outside looking in, and Toronto's got to try and take control and take advantage of those special teams struggles tonight.
That's always been the Bruins thing. Like 5-on-5, they're usually pretty solid, but it's always the special teams that kind of set them apart from other teams, especially that penalty kill. I don't know the last time I ever saw the Bruins with a penalty kill like that. They're usually one of the better penalty killing teams in the league, better defending team in the league.
Not Chara's Bruins, I can tell you that. Chara's Bruins would not stand for a 75% PK. That's for damn sure.
No, and look at the goals against, right? 3.17 goals against per game. Like, first off, you just gave Jeremy Swayman that massive contract. You then make that deal to trade Allmark, and you get Korpisalo in return, and it's been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Right. They got off to such a bad start too. They fired Jim Montgomery. Right. It's just kind of all been a bad. Like, this is just one of those years where I kept saying, like, at some point this Bruins team was eventually going to come back down to earth. Yes, they're a couple seasons removed from having one of the best seasons in recent memory.
Statistically, the best season in history. In history, Dave, not in history.
In history, only for it to come crashing down.
Yes.
But like this team was always going to be that one that you lost Bergeron, you lost Krejci, you obviously Char many years ago.
Tuukka
Rask, and like this is where also I always look back to that draft that they had those 3 picks in a row, right? And they go with DeBrusk,
Extension.
Yeah.
And
the third one was.
There was another Jacobs Borrell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None of those 3 players are on this Bruins team right now. Like, that remains to be the biggest. If you're looking
that's one of the best drafts in NHL history. Like, coming like after that, like they could have had Matt Barzal was the next player after those 3 consecutive picks. And then Brock Besser, Kyle Connor, if I'm not mistaken, I think Travis Konechny was also part of that draft later on in that first round. Like, there was so many guys that they could have had and they whiffed on. And yeah, like those are the players who would be in their prime right now for the Bruins. So for them to not hit on any of those draft picks, and realistically, like, let's take a look at the lineup that the Bruins are going to be icing tonight. And let's see how many of them are Bruins draft picks. Not a whole lot. Like, you've got David Pastrnak. They clearly hit on that draft pick. They've got Brad Marchand. They clearly hit on that draft pick. And then, okay, they got a couple of guys in the bottom 6, Trent Frederick, Matthew Poitras, John Beecher. Like, that's it, though, when you look at what they've got from a forward perspective. Like Geeky, they brought in through free agency. Zaka was a trade/free agency. Coyle, they brought in. Lindholm was a free agent signing. Like Brazeau was a undrafted free agent signing. Like Kastelich came in the Allmark deal. And even defensively, like outside of Mason Lohrei, they don't have another guy who's also like drafted and developed. Actually, I think Brandon Carlo was drafted by them also. And to be fair, Charlie McAvoy's injured and would be playing tonight. But when you look at this team, there's legitimately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of 7, if you include Swayman, 7 of 18 guys, 20 guys on this roster that were drafted, developed, and playing. And it's a big reason why this team's not playing as well, because I mean, even the guys who they are paying, Zakas and Lindholms and Zadorovs of the world, they're paying them big bucks, but not really contributing. Pavel Zacha, just 12 goals in 58 games. Lindholm, just 11 goals in 58 games. Like, there's not getting a whole lot of anyone. Like, Charlie Coyle has 20 points this year through 58 games. Zadorov, is not playing 14 points through 58 games, and they paid him a lot of money. I know he's not an offensive defenseman, but they paid him a lot of money, and it's just not going very well for him. So, and not to mention the goaltending has been very subpar this season after having some of the best goaltending in the last couple of years. Swayman, their horse, 298 goals against and 898 save percentage. It's a big reason why this team's struggling this year. And probably, we figured that it was going to happen at some point for the Bruins. I feel like we've guessed for the last 3 years, like this is the year, this is the year, this is the year, and it didn't happen. It's finally happened here. But you still know that they're going to put up a fight when Toronto comes to town. That's the thing. Like it's never an easy matchup against the Boston Bruins, right? It's still going to be a very hard fought matchup. David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand's going to be in the mix, and it's still going to be a hard fought game from start to finish. You'd think.
Oh, yeah, especially with the game in Boston. Like it's never an easy task. If you're the Leafs, right? Boston's the boogeyman in a lot of ways. That building, it's always tough. But I also see this as, again, this year's been different though. Like I think the first game they played against Boston this year was a 4-0 shutout, right? Like I think they're bucking some of those trends. Let's do another one and beat the living, bleep out of the Bruins in Boston, right? Let's have another good Canadian moment in TD Garden. Let's just say.
Yeah, Mitch Marner, put the team on your back, and this time, instead of making Matthews look a fool, let's give it to Matthews for the game-winning goal, which can also snap the kind of skid he's on when it comes to 5-on-5 goal scoring. 10 games in a row without a goal at 5-on-5. Not great. 13 if you include the Four Nations face-off games as well. Quickly, we'll take a look at the Leafs lineup. I don't believe we're going to see anything different than what we saw this past weekend. Here's was the lineup and how things kind of shook out for the Maple Leafs the other day. Matthews going to skate alongside Mitch Marner and Matthew Nyes. I think we're going to end up seeing Holmberg still stick with Tavares and Nylander, just because I think they want to keep rolling with McMahon, Domi, and Robertson because they played so well. Hopefully they can build off that success and they can continue to provide some offense. And I hope Alex Steeves stays in the lineup too, because I thought that he played really well this weekend and deserves, a little bit of an extended look here with Toronto.
I think so too. We talked a lot about him on yesterday's show and just how much having that ability of having a guy that's not just going to do good things defensively, but provide a bit of an offensive upside. Even if he doesn't score all the time, just having that offensive threat, but not also cheating for that offense. He's not, he's putting himself in good situations. And look, this is a player who's been very, we've been waiting for him to see if he can grab a hold of an NHL spot. Obviously he's a great producer down in the AHL. It's always tough to replicate that in the NHL, but I mean, this time around, he really understands the opportunity in front of him. So whatever was said to him when he got called up, he's listening to it.
Yeah, exactly. And he's played really, really well. And hey, there's been, a blueprint for guys who, we're given an opportunity. And if they produce, they stay in the lineup. Look at Bobby McMahon, right? He last year was putting around in the American League and then was given an opportunity. He produced right from the get-go and then kept going. Bobby McMatthews was born, and now he's a staple for this team in their middle six. And, whether Steve's can have a similar impact, I don't know. I'm not saying he will, but if he does, then he'll continue to be in the lineup. If he doesn't and he falls out and falls off, then, he won't be. I also wonder too, if the Leafs are kind of showcasing him potentially, for a team that might want, to take a look at a younger player, and Steves isn't young. He's 24, I want to say. I believe 24 years old, 23, 24 in that age range, maybe 25. So he's still, approaching his prime 25. And 25. So he still could play for a team in their bottom six right now. Should a team want to take a look at an Alex Steeves. So I think it makes sense to get him in as many games here between now and the trade deadline as possible. Speaking of the NHL trade deadline, Dave, I teased it earlier. On the other side, I will unveil who my number one target will be and should be for Brad Treliving and the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'll explain why on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Welcome into the Locked On at Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, with brand new episodes each and every day, coming at you wherever you get a podcast and also up on YouTube. If you are a daily listener, we thank you so much for coming back each and every day. And if you haven't subscribed yet and you enjoy the content, please do. That'd be really, really appreciated. We're on our road to 10,000. And once we get to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, well, we'll give away another jersey. We're hoping to get there by playoff time. So just be a friend, tell a friend about the Locked On Leafs podcast. All right, Dave. So Jonas Siegel put out an article earlier today on The Athletic. He puts out every Monday, a Monday morning Leaf report. And the subject of today's article was John Tavares and the kind of quiet dip that he's had the last couple of months. And I didn't quite realize how much he was struggling because the numbers are okay. Like, he's on pace for 33 goals, on pace for 72 points if he plays every game, and that would put him at 75 games total on the year. So he's, producing at a point per game average, which is basically where he's been at for the last few years. However, the on-ice numbers, the underlying numbers, the fancy stats, as some people like to call them, the analytics, not as rosy, Dave. And kudos to Jonas Siegel. And go read the full article there. We can get full context of what he's talking about. But since the middle of December, he uncovered that John Tavares has a goals for expected number sub 40%. So he's got an expected goals per 60 of 2, and expected goals against per 60 of 3.1, which is dead last among all forwards for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So defensively, John Tavares is on the ice. They're giving up way more offense than they're generating. That's what that means. And, obviously him and Nylander have been together. So Nylander is second on that list with 3 expected goals against per 60. And then Pacioretty's played with them quite a bit also. He's at 3.1, tied with John Tavares. And then he went on to note that the game against Chicago, shots were 11-2 for Chicago when Tavares, Holmberg, and Nylander were on the ice together. And that's kind of what prompted him to write this piece, I would imagine, when he saw that, and he dove deep and noticed that. And there's a couple of reasons for it, Dave. I think you can look at it. Age clearly could be declining. But I think the biggest reason, honestly, is you look at how tough his minutes have become. Yeah. Because when you look at this season compared to the rest, he's playing more minutes than usual, to be honest with you. So he's getting those minutes. And then he's also having to start in the defensive zone far more often than before. He's being used as the matchup center. So he's playing against the opposition's top line and usually starting in the defensive zone for a majority of his starts. His offensive zone starts is only.
Oh, lost you. Well, okay, I'll chime in a bit here. Just the big one for me is, the role he's playing is not the role that he's been accustomed. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not the role he's accustomed to. Like that's like for the age and his traits, right? He's not the most gifted. His skating has always been talked about, the lack of foot speed. Mm-hmm. And you're putting out John Tavares in defensive situations, which, face-off wise, he's always used in with draws now. Like, even on the power play, he's the one that's taking the face-off and things like that. But also look at the line mates too, right? It's not just him. William Nylander probably shouldn't be playing as many defensive zone minutes that he's getting right now.
Nope.
Pontus Holmberg, not a bad player, but again, not a player I'd be wanting to be playing heavy defensive minutes.
No.
They're just not. It's not what you want to see. You want to use your best offensive players in offensive situations, not in defensive situations. And as you're probably going to mention, part of the reason too that John Tavares is playing those minutes is because your third line of Robertson, McMahon, and Domi, more offensively driven players. They're not supposed to be playing, defensive roles. Bobby McMahon can. Domi and Robertson, not so much.
No.
Right. So you're caught in a place where you don't have your best two-way players, your best defensive players are your more offensively gifted players, your top core players. It's good for some teams to have, but there's a lack of balance right now on this Leafs team with that. And Tavares, yeah, you do notice a bit of a drop. I mean, I thought in the first game back with the goal he scored, I thought we saw a little bit of a pep in his step. Probably helped that he had a couple weeks off, right, to get himself kind of rested. Because, yeah, I looked at the time on ice that he's been having. 20 minutes. That's too much for John Tavares.
Yeah, it is. But the scoring hasn't necessarily been the problem, per se. Like they are scoring goals. Like that's something that we do need to acknowledge. Now, granted, right? So like we look at the goal differential, he's actually scoring at the highest rate that he scored throughout his career when it comes to goal differential. 66% of the times when he's on the ice, it's a Toronto goal, right? 37 goals for, just 19 goals against. So it's not that he's been a detriment and pucks are running up in the back of the net. These are all numbers at 5-on-5, by the way. But the problem is when he's on the ice now, it's the expected numbers that are bad. He's given up a lot, which means it's a lot of stress on the goaltenders, and they're coming up big. But, you never want to rely on that come playoff time when things get real tight. And I think that's the issue. But I also think Toronto, they want more scoring. And I think the way you get that is by, to your point, deploying the Nylanders and the Tavareses in the offensive zone a little more often. Like I was saying earlier, the offensive zone faceoff percentage for Tavares this year, 44.93%. That's it. The year before, 53%, 55%, 57%, 54%, 53%. Like the last 5 years has been way above those averages. But the Leafs don't have anyone they trust to play 3C. And that leads me to the point that I'm making here, that because of this, I believe the number one trade target for the Maple Leafs this year at the trade deadline has to be a defensively responsible third line center. That's got to be the number one trade target that the Leafs need to get. Because if they can fill that role, not only does that help the third line establish themselves as a team that could, as a line that could play both ways, give you 200 feet of hockey if you keep Bobby McMahon and you keep someone else along there, that can be responsible defensively, but that should also unlock a little bit more potential at that second line as well. So you get the perfect third line center that could beef up not only the third line, but the second line as well, and allow that middle six to really provide that secondary offense this team desperately needs.
I've always said, like, my ideal change would be Bobby McMahon coming up to the second line, right? And then you have a third line where, okay, you got Max Domi, a more defensive-minded center, and then
I even want Domi? Like, I don't think I want Domi there. I think I want Bobby McMahon on my.
So would you do okay then Domi on the second line?
Yeah, I would. Yeah,
you'd have Bobby McMahon.
Yeah, I want the offensively driven, the more high IQ offensive players, the playmakers in my top six. So
that's fine.
Who's going to get the puck out to Tavares? Who's going to get the puck out to Nylander? Yeah. I think he could easily and definitely be a guy like Max Domi.
And then, so like a third line, you could have McMahon, whoever the center you're looking at, and then you kind of rotate. Like a Pacioretty, I think would fit.
Well, if Yarncroc comes back, right? Healthy, there's your guy.
That's also true. Yes.
So I think that would be ideal. And the name that keeps popping up for me that would be a perfect fit is Scott Laughton. Scott Laughton, to me, would be the perfect target for the Toronto Maple Leafs at the trade deadline. I looked at his underlying numbers, and when it comes to expected goals against, he's near the tippy top defensively. He doesn't allow a lot of high danger chances, doesn't allow a lot of shots, and he gets those hard minutes that John Tavares gets. He gets those for the Philadelphia Flyers. So Scott Laughton, I think, could fill in that role perfectly as a third-line center. He's not too expensive, cap-wise. Will he cost a decent chunk of change? Probably. He probably will. But I think if this is the year that the Maple Leafs want to go for it and think that they're like a third line center away from being competitive in a wide open Eastern Conference, that's the type of all-in move that they should make. Because let's be honest, it doesn't sound like Ryan O'Reilly's coming to Toronto. So if it's not Ryan O'Reilly, something that's a little more realistic, I think Scott Laughton's a real good piece, a good second option here for the Maple Leafs.
What I like especially about Scott Laughton is, yes, you may have to give up more to get a Scott Laughton, but you're not getting a rental. He's not a rental player. He's I think it was one more year left at $3 million on his deal.
I believe so.
But like this has been my issue throughout all this time where the Leafs have been thrown away for but spending first round picks on rentals.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it when they did the Jake McCabe deal because that wasn't a rental. You had a player for a few years. Yeah. Why did it take so long for the Leafs to finally do that? I don't know, but like I think the market's
Muzzin. They did that with Muzzin where he had some term left on, and
I'm talking about kind of like the last couple of years, right?
Realistically,
like the Nick Foligno one,
Foligno and O'Reilly, like those are the two that everyone looks at as the pending UFAs. But honestly, at the time, I was all for it, so I'm not going to come here and backtrack on it. I was all for it, I really was, and I'm all for the Leafs pushing the chips in again because this is an interesting season. Like Mitch Marner's a UFA. John Tavares is a UFA. Like, if you want to win with this group, like they've been talking about wanting to do, they've had belief in this group for many, many years. Well, this might be the last year to do it. So if you are, and Brandon Shanahan is true to his word that he believes that they can win with this group, I mean, you have to go all in. You have to spend that first round pick. You might have to part with one of your top prospects to get the right player or right players. Because I don't think they're just one third line center away. They might have to make a couple of moves. But I do believe that Scott Laughton would be a tremendous addition to this Maple Leafs lineup.
I would like it. A lot of analysts have really put their their foot forward and saying like they really like the fit. I think. Again, you need. I just don't want a defensive-minded center. I want a center that's also got a chance to provide a bit of offense as well. Like I hear Nick Bjugstad's name a lot. Bjugstad will just be a defensive guy, which that can work for you in the playoffs. But I like to think that if you're going to spend the assets,
didn't Bjugstad score like 20 goals last year?
Did he score 20 last year? I might.
I thought he had a decent year last season.
I remember when the Oilers picked him up.
Yeah, he had 22 goals last year for Arizona.
Okay, that's not bad. Like when you look at what he did with Edmonton, it wasn't bad. I just think that the ceiling. I think Bjugstad's playing more offensive minutes that year.
Yeah, that's true.
I also just don't think that Utah now at the time. He was with Arizona. We scored 22. Utah right now, I don't know if they're even going to want to be sellers. Like they might view themselves as saying, this might be the year where we actually may want to actually try to be good. The Western Conference has potential opportunities for teams to go into. They're not out of it either. So, but I think Philly, they're out of it. They're selling off players, and I know right now I guarantee they view Laughton as a player that has a lot of value for a contending team. So they're going to try to drive this price up. If I'm the Leafs, try to get on this early. Try to force Philly to make a decision maybe a little bit earlier. I don't know. Does Scott Laughton have any trade protection?
Scott Laughton has. So he's got one more year left on his deal. It's a $3 million cap hit. And I don't know.
No trade protection. I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, I don't see anything either.
So that potentially hurts the Leafs. And the reason why I say that is that any team can go and make a bid for Scott Laughton. It's not like, when we're talking about Ryan O'Reilly, where there's a presumed no movement, right? He's only they want to make things right for him. Like everyone's bidding for Scott Laughton services. But I also think there's only a few teams that will want to pay up for Scott Laughton, and the Leafs would be one of them. So, and look, he's 30 years old. You bring him in. This may be a guy that wants to stick around for a bit. If he can be on this trajectory for a bit, this could actually help the Leafs solidify their center ice position a little bit more too.
Yeah. Yeah, down the middle at the very least. He's got 11 goals in 55 games so far this year, on pace to score more than he did last year. He's got a career high of 18 goals 2 years ago in 78 games with the Flyers. So, he's a guy who could get you 15 goals or so. And as your third line center, you get me 15 goals, you kill penalties, you can win some faceoffs, and you're elite defensively. Sign me up. And I think that's what Scott Laughton could do for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we'll see. This won't be the last time we get to trade deadline talk, Dave. We're less than 2 weeks away from the trade deadline. So I'm sure there'll be plenty more to discuss in the coming days and weeks here with the deadline fast approaching. All right. Anything else you want to bring to my attention or get into quickly before we sign off for the day?
Just one final thing, guys. We are starting an Instagram account. So if you want to join up, I'll put the link in the bio in the description of the show, so you can go and get more Leafs content right to your phones on Instagram.
Absolutely. Do that. Subscribe to us also wherever you get a podcast. That would be much, much appreciated. That'll do it for us here today on the show. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the podcast. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs pod on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuckfella Dave, at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow to break down tonight's Leafs and Bruins matchup. Go Leafs, go! But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.